Hey, welcome to another Enneagram podcast.
Yeah, that's right. Yet another Enneagram podcast. But this one's different. Another Enneagram podcast is here to help you be a better leader for your team.
We know leadership is already challenging enough, and it can be downright frustrating when your team communication breaks down.
Another Enneagram podcast is here to tell you stories of leaders just like you who are learning how to lead their teams better with the Enneagram. If you want your team to communicate better, be more productive, and love their jobs, another Enneagram podcast is for you. Hey, welcome back to another Enneagram podcast. Got your host Ryan here, along with my awesome co-host Cody. Cody, how's it going?
It's going well, man. How are you?
Doing okay. Been sipping some coffee, editing some podcasts.
Nice.
You know, nothing to complain about.
Yeah, sounds great. I've been back in your part of the country for the last...
adopted part of the country.
Yes, yeah. For the last 3 weeks, and it is quite humid. I don't understand how I survived here for as long as I did. I feel like I've been like hanging out in the rainforest the last few weeks.
You got all the benefits of going swimming without the swimming pool.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't call those benefits. You got all the consequences of going swimming and none of the benefits.
I just forgot what it's like to get out of the shower, dry off, and feel wet.
Dude.
Again.
Yes. That is annoying.
It's the worst.
Yes.
It's the worst.
Absolutely. Well, so today we've got a podcast that I recorded an interview with a couple of guys that was just me and them, and you haven't even heard it yet.
No.
But I was super excited with how it came out. So it's a couple of guys named Nate and Chandler, and I met them online, just like through LinkedIn, actually. So cool. I met these guys and started talking Enneagram. I was like, man, I want to get them on the podcast. So I did an interview with them, and they're both up in Michigan, I believe. And man, it was just really, really cool. Really enjoyed talking with them. What was even cooler about it, other than just that they were cool to talk to, was the fact that Nate is an Enneagram 7 like yourself, and Chandler is an Enneagram 1 like me.
Wow.
So they have been friends for quite a while. I think, if I remember right, Chandler introduced Nate to the Enneagram in general. They used to work together. So you tell me, what do you think a working relationship is like between a 1 and a 7? Let's say before they've become kind of like self-aware about some of their tendencies.
Okay. So I've been hanging out with my sister the last few days, who is a 1.
Right.
And sometimes I forget about our dynamic when we get to hang out with each other. So, for example, last night, I'm on my phone. My wife was talking to me, but I was kind of like lost in like kind of dreamland in my head. And my sister, the 1, hey, is like, your wife's talking to you, just making sure that I'm keeping up to date on my just good duties, as a human being. And so I would imagine with these guys is the 1 is definitely keeping the 7 locked to doing what he said he was going to do.
Yeah.
And I know for me and my relationship with my boss now, is I can unload some ideas on him, and he's very much going to help sort through the weeds of those ideas.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side is I get to help him sometimes with not getting so trapped in the day-to-day task and making sure that those are done to perfection. And it's a cool relationship. So, I would imagine those might be some of the things for them.
Definitely. It was so good. They talked about all that stuff that you mentioned, talked about working together, what that has meant as they have pressed into Enneagram for each of their own types, and learned kind of strengths and weaknesses and how those two numbers can work together better. So that was really cool. They talked about that. They talked about what has meant for them personally, just as they have discovered more about who they are through the Enneagram. They talked about how it impacted their marriages, which was super cool. And then also just their teams now that they're not working together, but the teams of people that they do work with now. So it was a very well-rounded interview. They talked about it in a lot of different I don't know, what word am I looking for? Circumstances, environments. And it was just really good. And so I'm excited about this interview going out. I'm excited for you to hear it.
For sure.
And check it out. And yeah, I hope that these guys get some love from it. I'll tell you before we jump into this how I actually met Nate. So Nate was the one I interacted with first. And I didn't talk about this in the interview with him, and so I wanted to make sure and mention it here. I was scrolling through LinkedIn one day, and this video came up in my feed, and it was this guy just standing there, and you almost would have thought that like the video froze, right? And he's just kind of standing there, but it's not, because he'll like blink every couple of seconds. And then I look at the like text for the video, and there's a hashtag in it that says like hashtag long pause videos.
Oh my gosh.
And it was amazing. He would start a video and be like, he decided he was going to do a video about different friends that he had. So, if he did one about you or something, it'd be like, let me tell you about Cody. Cody is...
I'm very uncomfortable just sitting here watching
very
this.
creative. and it was these... I mean, it was kind of ridiculous and a little bit awkward and stuff, but it was so out of the ordinary.
Oh my gosh.
And he did it like with so much abandon for what other people might think that I loved it. I found myself cracking up at it because it was a little bit awkward, but I don't know, I just loved it. And so
that's awesome.
So I reached out to him. I was like, dude, I have like nothing to say other than I watched one of your videos and I thought it was amazing.
That's so cool.
So hashtag long pause videos. Nate Jebb on LinkedIn. You can go find him that way.
That's so fun.
So
fun.
Anyway, we'll get into the interview. I think it may be a little bit longer one, and so I want to make sure people have plenty of time for that. So here it is, my interview with Nate Jebb and Chandler Karadsheh. All right, Nate and Chandler, welcome to another Enneagram podcast. Excited to have you guys on today.
Thanks. Yeah, I think we'll learn something.
Oh, well, I'm excited to have people on who can, teach some other people something. So maybe it'll be beneficial both ways. So Nate and Chandler here, why don't you guys take just a minute to introduce yourselves, where you're from, what you do, what your experience has been with Enneagram, just so people listening can kind of get to know you a little bit. So who wants to go first?
I'll kick it off.
Okay.
Well, I think first the context is Chandler and I, because that was the thing that helped Enneagram help most. So Chandler and I have worked together for about a year and a half. We were at a company together, and we found out about the Enneagram, and he's a 1 and I'm a 7. And so it made sense to us. Oh, that's why Nate's always got these like cockamamie schemes that may or may not be doable. And that's why Chandler's always doing a lot of stuff. So what we had been frustrated about whenever we were frustrated was, I'm thinking, man, Chandler, you got to get more creative. And he's thinking, Nate, you got to get down to business.
Yeah.
And when we realized 7 and 1, we kind of started thinking of ourselves as maybe two different halves of the same brain or something, and so if I can come up with a bunch of cool ideas and then he can help start doing them, that works a lot better. And we just were expecting that we both would do both, but once we started splitting it up, it worked better.
I love that. That's awesome. So give us a little bit more introduction to just who you are, kind of how you learned about Enneagram, and maybe how that's been helpful even in other places.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'm Nate Jebb. I live in Holland, Michigan. I've been in sales for the past 10 years, and I learned about Enneagram from, I guess I'd heard about it multiple times, but I learned about it from a small group that Chandler and I were in together at our church. And the context was we're always working on our marriages. And so my wife is a 6 and I'm a 7. And when we learned about it, it was really kind of like I just said with Chandler, it was really clarifying, because when I get scared, I want to go out and act and take risks. And when my wife gets scared, she wants stability and no risks. So where that had been a tension point, we now had clarity, and it was like, oh, okay, well, I can go for stable if that'll help you. Yeah. So we learned about it in this marriage small group, and it's I always find if you can name something, it's easier to deal with it, or know how to help it. And so both the things that have gone well in my marriage and in my work relationship with Chandler were clarified by the Enneagram, because we were, like I just said, with the stability with my wife, or even with divvying up tasks and thought work between Chandler and I, we kind of knew what each of us was supposed to do, and it made working together a lot easier.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. Chandler, how about you? A little quick introduction, and just tell us about, what Enneagram number you are and what you've learned through that.
Sure. So my name is Chandler. I also live in Holland, Michigan. It's a great area to raise a family, kind of right in the middle of the Midwest. But Nate and I probably live like 2 miles from each other. So we've also stayed pretty good friends since we started working together, which was a while ago. I've been working in kind of communications and content marketing for almost 8 years now. And I'm a 1 on the enneagram, which means my default position is typically create a list of tasks, be obsessed with getting all of the tasks done in the right order and to the highest degree of perfection. And enneagram, I mean, before I knew about what enneagram was and the language it gives you and the context for interacting with other people who have also have that language, I was aware of this in my own tendencies through my friendships and my marriage and everything else. So Nate and I, as he said, we were part of this group that was working on how to use Enneagram as a framework for communication in marriage. And that was my first exposure to it. And I was somewhat doubtful at first because I've done Myers-Briggs several times and some other personality profiling tools, including things just like, IQ tests or whatever, just trying to figure out how you work, how your brain works. Yeah. And once we got into it, I realized it was a very helpful way of qualifying kind of my personality and aptitudes. And it was the same for my wife, and she's a 2. And so when we started realizing that there were specific things that we could do to augment the helpful parts of our personality or recognize the shortcomings, that just was very helpful in every area. So after that, I also used that with a couple of teams at work and kind of introduced that language and those concepts because we just found the language to be really helpful. It's a simple rating scale, and you can also understand what you might do to build other people up. I have a specific coworker that's a 2. And so I immediately knew what was going to make that person feel a little more fulfilled and like they're getting their work done. And all of that's just been very helpful. So I would say it's been probably about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years of using the ideas and kind of having that help me build both personally and professionally in my relationships with other people.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I love all that. And I love having the two of you guys on together, being friends that have worked together in the past and just friends outside of that. I specifically love, though, and I didn't know this till we got on here, that you guys were a 7 and a 1, which is funny to me because I don't know if you have caught any of the previous episodes of this podcast, but I'm a 1 and my co-host Cody, who's not on here today but normally is a 7, and so I love that. I'm expecting to learn some good things that I can take back to my relationship with my co-host, so excited about that. So
yeah, it's a fun relationship dynamic.
Yeah, well, and it should be, right? And I think sometimes different numbers get along with anybody, right, depending on how healthy or unhealthy they can be. But, I think there are some numbers that may have more challenges than others. And I could see 1s and 7s having some real friction, right? And I'm sure you guys.
Oh, well, I hate Chandler. I hope that comes across in this. We just work together.
Well, good. Now I'm self-conscious about my co-host hating me, so I appreciate
it. Yeah. Well, I actually have some good. Okay, so you're saying you want to, learn some stuff. We have some funny stories, and Chandler, even as you're talking and I'm talking, I'm trying to think of like anecdotes because we've had. I mean, I don't know if we've really said it as straight as it is, but like we're great friends. We hang out all the time. I call Chandler every day, and so we do have some good anecdotes. And I think one of them is because I'm so like zany creative, I like to work on just blank pieces of printer paper. Uh-huh. So when we were working on a project together, I'm trying to think of what was something that we worked on. So we're in West Michigan for sales. We're trying to get a hold of business owners, right? And I would tell Chandler like I'm gonna go work on this, and I would take like a stack of printer paper and like go in a room and like literally draw scribbles. It's like it looks like kind of crappy drawings of what a business owner might look like, and and like kind of mind mappy stuff. And then I'd come back to him and be like, here's what I made. And he's like, well, I don't really know how we're going to like turn that into a sales model. And then we kind of like, I don't know if we ever got into a total swing of it, but we found a lot of the time what would happen is I'd bring him that kind of gobbledygook, and one question we like to ask each other is, well, what's the next action? And so he would always, what he's good at, what his brain's going to do when he sees that gobbledygook is he's going to clarify it, and he's going to make it into a task list. So he'd look at the list and be like, okay, well, you wrote like marketing companies and drew like an arrow going up. So what is that all about? And I'm like, well, I give some explanation. He's like, well, have you made a list of the 30 marketing companies in West Michigan? I'm like, no. And actually, I'm not very good at research on a computer, so could you do that? He's like, yeah, I'll do that. But what I am good at is striking up a conversation with people just on a random phone call. So I'd give him this stupid drawing saying marketing. He'd say, have you made the list? I'd say, no, will you make it? And then I'd call all of them that day, and we'd get meetings with a couple of them. And then then I would go meet with them and have a great time. And then I'd come back and I was like, yeah, it was great. And he's like, okay, well, are you going to like work with them, or like what happened? And I'm like, well, we had coffee and like we talked about playing chess and like raising kids in West Michigan. And he would always like keep me on track and reminded. And then we would joke because on days where we would work like separately, let's say I'd like work from home or something, he would call me and be like, oh my gosh, I'm dragging. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm completely scattered. And then we would, we'd come together and I'd bring a little energy and he'd bring a little focus. And I don't know if I'm representing it totally, like the specifics, right, Chandler? But that, I just remember thinking that time when you would like put white pieces of paper on my desk, like do this thing. And then I'd like go into a room and call on the people that worked well for us. So I don't know if you can think of any other riffs off of that, but that was a good way of working together.
I love that.
Well, the funniest and I think most succinct summary to me of a particular 1 in 7 relationship, and probably a 1 in anybody else, was me being at home and Nate calling me and kind of giving me this spontaneous idea. He was like, I want to go do this thing right now. And it was probably late at night. It's like, let's go to Lake Michigan and kick a soccer ball around or something. And and my response, unironically, I wasn't thinking of it this way, was, man, that sounds so fun, and I really want to just do something on a whim, but I can't be spontaneous right now. And basically I was saying like, well, Nate, I have to plan my spontaneity. And that was actually in my marriage, like the very first year, was something that my wife would always say, let's just, we don't have kids yet. Let's go do this. And I'm like, well, how about we plan to be spontaneous at, 9:00 on Saturday after we've had coffee. And the fact that I said that unironically, not even thinking about the fact that it was a contradiction in itself, it was so funny. So we do reference that a lot, which is one's, I can only speak from my own perspective, but once you recognize that you do have this weakness, which is you can't kind of switch directions really quickly, you have to learn how to counteract that. But that to me is just one of my favorite anecdotes because it's such a funny irony.
Well, okay, but now that makes me think of, so Chandler and I, there's this like local theater here, and Chandler and I will like play open mics together, and there was this one time, okay, so you're a 1, right? He's technically phenomenal. I mean, this guy he's a good bassist, but he's also a good drummer and he's also a good pianist and all this stuff. And so he like had mastered this very complicated drum piece. And I'm just going to go there, Chandler. I'm telling the story. And we invited like all of our buddies from church to come out and get a beer and like watch us play a show together. Mm-hmm. And so we go, and because I'm the 7, I'm the guy who is like I'm like, let's just go play this show. Like, who cares? We don't have to do a lot of prep work. So Chandler has prepared this phenomenal drum piece. Well, I forget to relay to like the sound team that he's going to need to have it set up. So the way that this open mic works is you could like play along to music, and it was a gag that a lot of people did at the open mic. So he was playing along with a guitar track, and I forgot to tell the sound team to like put a speaker up against his drum set. So you can't play a super complicated like 7/8 time like piece if you can't hear the piece you're playing with. But right. I'm like the guy who's like, oh yeah, we'll just go, it'll be great, because I never do anything complicated. And then Chandler shows up, and basically long and short of it is he can't hear the piece, so he can't play along with it. So then I am like, so then I start improvising some zany piece. And the long and short of it is we get like, we didn't punch each other, but there was a little bit of a fight on stage in our live show. And so then, because it's the two tensions, right? It's like, I want to go to like just spontaneous wacko land, and he wants to like execute something with excellence. And so then we get off stage, and all of our friends from church like make fun of us. They're like, "Oh wow, boys, really? You let it all hang out there on stage?" And so okay, cool. But we're great friends, and we like playing together, and we had some other successes when we played. So we were like, well, how could we make it better? So the next time we did it, we structured it so that there was a time of me improvising and then a time of Chandler playing his piece.
Yes.
And he prepared this. I'll have to actually send you the video because it's that good.
Yeah.
He prepared Gaston from, Beauty and the Beast. And his impression of it's spot on. And so we're like playing this piece together, and all I'm doing is like yelling at the audience to sing along. And Chandler is nailing in perfect one format Gaston. And it was just an absolute triumph. I mean, if you can imagine, I don't know if you can recall the song, but it's like at the end of the song, it's like Gaston. And then the whole bar sings Gaston. We got this entire bar to yell Gaston throughout the song, and we were just having a great time. And it was perfect because it's a 7 and a 1 working together. We tried it. We failed. We figured out like a way around it. And then when we came back, absolutely nailed it. And it's still, it's something that I hope, Chandler and I both think that was a triumph. And it's on YouTube. So that's some tips.
I'll have to check that out, and we'll link it in the show notes as well. But yeah, it definitely sounds like you guys have found some of the tension, but then found ways to work through it, which is awesome. I love that. What do you think is some of the big insights that you guys have picked up about yourselves as you've processed this Enneagram stuff?
Do you want to go, Chandler? I have talk.
Sure. Well, I think the biggest thing is part of what I was saying at first, which is it's very difficult for me or it has been historically, to switch directions and to do it quickly. I like to think that there's a plan that's going to be followed and going to be seen through till the end, and the end result is going to be sort of, better than what we had expected, under promise, over deliver on everything, even if it's just the dishes. And it's really not sustainable, and it's really not healthy. And one of the things I learned the first couple of years of marriage, I haven't been married that long, just over 5 years, but just in the first couple of years, learning that it's really healthy for myself mentally and physically to let some of the almost like OCD, like, those compulsions go. And for those people who are married, maybe stepping back and looking at how that may be working, but in your marriage. But for those people who aren't married, thinking, how do you find, a partner that it can pull those tendencies out of you, or maybe reshape them in a way where it's healthier for you. So for my wife, she would encourage me to say, you've been working on this for a long time. It's okay you step away from it. It's okay that you take time to reset or restore yourself a little bit. And so I would say over the last 5 years, I'm much, much more laid back than I was. And that's been probably added not joking. It was probably added years to my life from just not worrying about things or kind of obsessing over them. So I think if there was one thing that far and away was my takeaway, it's just been that you have to recognize those destructive tendencies even in yourself. And of course in the Enneagram text, and what people have written about it, they do point out an unhealthy one is they do get myopic. And so for me, Myers-Briggs gave me some of that perspective, but the Enneagram, I think, made it more relatable, and then also gave me language to talk about it with my wife and friends and whoever else, or even setting up my work schedule. So one quick, easy way of demonstrating that is, I knew that when this COVID stuff started hitting, working from home was going to be easy for me because I'm able to set and keep a schedule. But I also knew the challenge would be I would always be drawn back to work because it's right there. It's right there at home with me. So releasing that and recognizing it, I think, are probably really huge benefits for me.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I identify with a lot of that stuff that you just said. In fact, whenever I do like Enneagram workshops or something, one of the little like half jokes that I tell about Enneagram ones is that the ones in the room can load the dishwasher better than you can. Is that
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
does that resonate?
Yeah, absolutely. I got home last night and I was just really tired, and we had gone out and done some stuff, and I told my wife, I was like, let me just do the dishes real quick just so we can we start our day tomorrow with nothing. She's like, you're really tired, why don't you just go to bed? And I got in bed and kind of was planning to read or even talk for a little bit, and like just immediately passed out. So it's like, obviously she's right in that situation, but loading the dishes is like what I default start doing, I'm just kind of looking for something to do, and I want it to be really good.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. That's I love that. I've had a lot of the same experiences in marriage, and just learning about myself as a one and how that affects others, especially those closest to you, like a spouse. So no, I get that for sure. Nate, what about you? What's been some of the biggest insights about yourself that you've had through the Enneagram?
I think getting rid of shame, probably, for what I can't do. When I was working at this marketing company in Cincinnati, and, I think every company since China started making mugs has like company mugs. And we accidentally bought like 300 mugs. I think it was truly like an order for 30, and it was like, whoops, we got 300.
Oh, no.
So I was like, well, I told the CEO, I'm like, don't worry about this. We'll turn this in. We'll make this right. So the only way to get value to something that's not that valuable is to get it autographed. Duh. Or at least that's a principle that it's like it's a crappy basketball, but here it is. It's autographed by MJ, so now it's worth $1 million. Right. So I got the coolest guy in the company to sign all of the mugs. Huh. And then every week I would give them out as like an award to just someone who I'd noticed like had really, you're like, wow, that was a pretty good script they wrote for that video, or that was what, something small. You did the dishes, you're a one, Chandler loaded the dishwasher. And so I'd give this stupid little speech, and like we'd all laugh about it, and sometimes I'd make videos or play songs about people, and it was just fun. And not related to my job, certainly cost me my reputation. I had no dignity by the time I left the company, but I know that a lot of the people there had told me like, well, that brings a lot of fun to the company and we like that. But if you had asked me like, how did I do when I was at Epifio, I'd probably be ashamed and discouraged. And I'd tell you, well, I did okay, but I didn't, I always had trouble following through on my tasks. Like I would have said something like that to you. And it's true. I do. And I've done tons and tons of reading now on like task management, and I love the book Getting Things Done by David Allen and all of this stuff. But if it's almost like which metric you want to pick, I would like if it was like, Nate, how'd you do? I would say, well, not great, because I didn't write down a list every day and follow through on it, though I followed through on some of it. But now I'm like, well, yeah, but a lot of people really got some joy after a long work week. We'd always have those meetings on Friday. And I did that for probably a year, every Friday, and just give a little speech, and that's something. I mean, it's something. I was in sales, I was hitting my numbers, so it was fine. I was doing my job. So I think what I learned about myself was, if you're evaluating yourself, what's that thing, if a bird thinks that he's bad because he can't climb a tree, and a squirrel thinks he's bad because he can't swim in a lake, that's stupid. Stop doing that. You're a squirrel, you climb trees. You're a duck, I should have said duck, but you get what I'm saying. People are good at different things. And I was asking myself, am I being a good one right now? Well, no, I'm not being a good one. I'm not a one. I'm a 7.
Yeah.
And if I had asked myself, am I being a good 7? I'm knocking it out of the park, man. I'm absolutely having a ball. People are loving it. I'm using my strengths well. And I think and I've thought a lot about this recently. It's like, how can you just ask for help so that the weaknesses aren't really a liability? Because if every day people are saying, Nate, we really need you to make a task list and follow through on it, we've created a bad setup. Because I'm not bad at following through on tasks, but you know what's going to happen on task number 3? I'm going to be out doing task number 3. I'm at FedEx Kinko's. I hit it up with this guy in the yard, and he's an architect here locally, and we talked for 20 minutes. Now I'm going to miss my last tasks on the list. But then 1 year later, when we're looking to branch out our marketing for architecture firms, I'm going to call Dave that I met at FedEx Kinko's, and it's going to be awesome. That's what I'm bringing to the table. So Peter Drucker, the management wonk, has this thing where he says, always put people in positions to use their strength and then just find a way to work their weaknesses out of the equation. So if you have an accountant who truly wants to sit down and do the numbers and they could not be better at it, they could not be more detailed, it's so fun for them, but they don't really want to chit-chat with people, put them in an office in the corner where they don't have to chit-chat. They'll do the best work you've ever seen. Yeah. And I think I was trying to make the accountants chit-chat. Well, just don't do that. That's a dumb setup. And so what has occurred to me is if you get the setup right, it can really strip some of the liability away. Because I have weaknesses, but I also have some superpowers. And so set it up so that Nate gets to meet people in the FedEx Kinko's driveway, and also set it up so that he has people supporting him with his task list. So I think one thing I've been working on now is I'm trying to build a structure around me, with even just people. It's crazy. I've found I don't think I can do Microsoft Excel very well. So stop trying. Get someone who's good at Excel and ask them to do it. So what I've learned about myself is I'm a good 7, but I'm not a good 1.
Well, I think that's brilliant. I love, you're talking about measuring yourself, the scale, at which you're measured against. And I love that. That's brilliant. Have you guys, I know you've already been talking about it a little bit, but how else have you guys found this conversation to be helpful in the context of a team or a group that you're working with?
What do you think, Chandler?
Well, if you have people who all have had some exposure to the Enneagram idea, it's so helpful to know the most basic ways to make people feel focused, valued, appreciated, and connected. Because which is how you're going to get either, great partnership or great work, great results out of that relationship or the work that you need to do. And so I work with somebody who's a 2, and I think I said that before. And so, in the back of my mind, if we're working on a project, I can hold these 2 things in tension. And those 2 things are, 1, work always has to be very clear. If you're trying to get a specific outcome, you need to define the outcome very clearly. But 2, if you want someone to emotionally feel attached to the work and feel like they know how to produce something that's going to be helpful at the end, you might just tack on the phrase, this will be really helpful to me and the team because A, B, or C. Or this will really help me meet my objectives, and I really appreciate you taking this on. That might be what gets them through the extra 2 hours it takes to do that versus saying, well, I'm certainly very clear about what I need to do. So if you're going to give someone some yard tools and say, I need you to clear this 3,500 square feet of space, and I need it to be done in 3 hours. Well, they're very clear about what they're going to do. But depending on how much you know about them, you might know it actually means more to them to say, this is a space for me to garden. And so I'm going to use this to grow food and, X, Y, Z. And that might actually be what produces your better result. Because not only are they clear, which everyone needs, but they have sort of been motivated, I think, in the right way to want to do the work. And so I would say from a professional standpoint, it's very helpful to know how they're motivated and clear and all those other things. I think if you're maybe you're talking about somebody who's at a different point on the spectrum, not a 1 or 2 or a 7, you might know that if they appear argumentative, they're really just trying to get to that point of clarity, or they might be really passionate about sticking to a point because they truly believe that that's the right thing, or they might be a peacemaker, and they're really just trying to get everybody to get on the same page. And maybe that's a person who's better suited for A and not B, because B just needs the hard driving person, but they don't need a lot of agreement on something. So those are all kind of just scenarios, but a lot of them I've found, as you are with family or you're working, if you have that in your back pocket, and then of course, if they've kind of had the discussions about Enneagram, it brings a whole other level of clarity, because you can say, hey, as somebody with these traits to your personality, let's figure out how we can do this the best way possible. And I think if you're willing to just share about that, it's like, oh my goodness, now we're on a totally different page. We're so much clearer. We know what the other person expects. And eventually that just probably becomes more and more of a inherent part of how you're communicating. So kind of a long-winded answer, but I guess those are just,
No, I love it.
That's what comes to mind.
And even thinking about you guys working together, a 1 and a 7, I know one of the biggest insights for me as a 1 looking out at several 7 friends that I have, and Nate, I'd love to hear your feedback on this too, if you think it's off or whatever. But one of the things I have found is that, I like to put things in motion. Whenever there's an idea or a desire for something to be done, my kind of reaction is to be like, okay, well, let's do it. Like, what do we need to do to make that happen, right? And then to start to systematize and organize and get everything ready to implement, right? And then 7 friends that I have, and even 7s that I've worked with, seem to be these like idea factories, right? Just cranking out idea after idea after idea. And for me, Enneagram was helpful in that conversation because I had to learn that, okay, not every idea that my 7 friends crank out is something to be implemented, nor do they always expect every idea that they have to be implemented. Has that been true for you guys? Is that an accurate thing or anything there for you?
Yeah, I'll go. There's because this is kind of business context, there's a book called Rocket Fuel, and it talks about a partnership. It says basically, you're a small business, you're kind of going to have like the crazy visionary, has a million ideas a week guy, and then you're going to have an integrator who takes those ideas, picks the one out of the million that is worth doing, and then gets it done. And it's a very good book. It's based off of this whole model called the Entrepreneurial Operating System, and it's worth looking into. It's all written by Gino Wickman. But the concept that 7s want to proliferate ideas, but that only 1 out of 100 may be good, really helped me. Because it's like, I don't know if you've ever seen, and I could send you a picture of it, but in facilitation, meeting facilitation, and Game Storming is a book on facilitation that talks about this. But there's basically two main stages to like a day-long session. There's what they call divergent thinking, which is where you just come up with a bajillion ideas. Some of them are good, some of them are weird, some of them are whatever. And then there's the second half called convergent thinking, where you take out of all those ideas, you prioritize them, organize them, pick which ones are valuable, make next action steps, make a plan. And you got to have both, You got to have the guy who says, give me a white piece of paper, I will fill this thing. And then you got to have someone to come in and say, yeah, but I hated most of it. But gosh, that one idea you came up with, that's really good. I mean, Hemingway said, write drunk, edit sober. It's kind of like that, and I'm the guy who's writing drunk all the time. And Chandler's the guy who's editing sober. And it certainly has been the trend that I have a lot of ideas, and that a couple of them really are good, but that if you take me at face value, like if you think our relationship is Nate's going to come up with an idea and Chandler's going to get it done, we're going to have a problem because we're going to go a million directions and we won't get anywhere. But if you think Chandler is like I think of like a music producer, you've got like the artist who's like, well, what if I did these lyrics? And the music producer's like, no one wants to hear that. And like he's the guy who picks. And if you thought, I guess the epiphany for me was, it's good for a 7 to have a lot of ideas, and it's good for the other person, the 1 or the editor, whoever, to say, yeah, we're not going to do most of those. Both of those are okay. We don't got to be mad about that conversation.
Do you ever get offended, like if you throw out an idea and somebody like me or Chandler comes along and tells you why you can't do it or shouldn't do it? Is that ever offensive to you?
I don't know if I've ever been offended. No, yeah, of course it's offensive. Yeah, I get mad about that all the time. I think the workaround is if you can just say, like, preface the conversation and say, hey, Chandler, I've got, and I do this more with my wife than I do with Chandler, but I say, like, I've got a bunch of ideas here. Before we start shooting them down, will you hear them all out and give me any ideas that they make you think of? So if you just break it up into stages, because what gets frustrating is if I've got 10 ideas and we know just in general, well, one of those is probably going to be pretty good. But after my first idea, you shut it down. You like stop the flow. Let's just get them all out on the table. We know 9 are going to suck. And then you're with your smart brain, are going to pick the one that's good. But if you stop my flow, then you're stopping my value. But yeah, I get offended. I mean, last night I was talking to what was the situation? It was oh gosh, I was stressed out, and because bedtime can be stressful. And so I just like retreat to watching John Prine videos because most of what I'm doing now. And she comes over and says basically like, hey, you didn't like fill up the kid's water bottle, so I had to go upstairs. And she's, third trimester. It's like, don't make your wife go upstairs. You can do it. And she got in my face a little bit, which I like about her, but I never like it in the moment. She was like, if you're going to do bedtime, like finish it up, which is fair. And I took offense to that, and I said like, oh, I'm tired, and like you're putting pressure on me, blah blah blah. And I'll tie this back in a second to the creative ideas and getting feedback. And I'm like, I'm tired, and she's like, no. Like she's so cool, my wife. She's like, no, I don't buy it. And I'm like, dang it, like she just shut me down. So, but I had somewhere to go, so I'm walking out the door, and the last thing I say before I leave is I'm like, that is rude and unhelpful, and then I like storm out. Then I'm standing outside. I'm like, man, if I get in a car crash or something, that's not going to be the way to end it. So I go back and open up the door. I'm like, I'm sorry that I'm grumpy, but I just am burned out. And she's like, yeah, I appreciate the apology. And then I walk out, and so we're on good terms, so to speak. And then I get out. I of course go to the gas station and buy a bag of gummy bears and binge eat most of them. The rest are in my little drawer in the car. And then when I come home, I was just filled with affection for my wife, because it is very hard to meet someone who's going to not indulgent, but specifically and helpfully give you like that's no good. That's not a good one. And in this case, it was like a relational thing that I truly should have done. But she's that way with my ideas, and so is Chandler. And it's so, like, it's hard to do, to be the editor. It's frustrating. So when you're saying, do I ever get frustrated? Yeah, absolutely. But that's because I'm kind of an emotional guy. I cool off, and then I come back and say, thank you for marrying me, and I really value your friendship, because this is what I need. I need my butt kicked. I'm the zany guy. I'm the emotional guy. Yep, kick my butt, and we'll make something great.
No, I think that's great. Chandler, Nate talked about how he can kind of set the stage a little bit for those conversations. What about on your end? What have you found that helps? I know for me, like, I'll kind of self-deprecate every now and then and call myself like a wet blanket on the fun and things like that. But, what have you found that works better as you're trying to, as Nate said, be the editor, be the one that helps people implement things and systematize things and decide what to pursue and what not to pursue? How have you seen that go better or not, and what can other people kind of emulate from that?
Well, that's a really good question. I think to your question to Nate about, do you get offended? I don't know if you were fair to yourself there. I feel like you don't often. It's pretty rare. Maybe it just depends on the situation, but we often...
Well, more common in marriage than with you, I think, because we're under more pressure together, but keep going.
Well, I'm just thinking of Plato's quote, which is, to paraphrase, it's the mark of an educated mind to be able to hold an idea without accepting it. And especially a one under pressure, wants to think that their idea is best, primarily because they just want to get going on it, which is kind of what you said, Ryan, which is like, let's just do it. And I've had to learn how to hold those ideas without doing all of them or necessarily believing that all of them are true or right. And so I think the challenge when you're trying to sift through a lot of information is to say, can I look at these 10 things? Can I critically assess them without truly holding them? So can I, from a distance, assess them, their quality, their order of importance, their pertinence? If I can do that, then I'll probably be able to come up with the top 3 at that point. And this is something I just have had to do professionally for a long time, which is you do have to sift through all those competing ideas, ideas is one way of framing it up. A lot of times we're just talking about decisions, right? Do you hire person A, or do you make, choice B because it seems to have some advantages? So I think being able to hold the ideas in a way where you can fairly consider them and then kind of determine which ones really are best fit the criteria that you have. I think I'm trying to think of one specific way, or really what I'm trying to think of as a practice that I've found. And I think probably it's something akin to just pros and cons, but just asking clarifying questions like, what exactly are we trying to do? And Nate mentioned getting things done, and there's some helpful tools in that way of thinking as well, which is basically what's just the next action I can do. That kind of thinking is also in EOS, which is related to the entrepreneurial operating system, which Nate mentioned. But as you're setting objectives, when you meet each week, you typically pick just kind of the one thing you can do in the next 7 days. And so if you're thinking about breaking down ideas into A, choosing them, and then B, acting on them, you do need a method for not kind of biting off the whole thing at one time, because I think ones are prone to do that. And I think sevens are probably, prone to say, let's do all of them, or again, let's do the whole thing at once. But if it takes more than an hour, I'm just going to be on to the next thing. Yeah. So it's kind of, philosophically, it's like you've got to be able to think about them, but not necessarily be attached to all of them.
Yeah.
I have one that you're asking for kind of like tips or whatever, and related to the frustration point that you asked, how would a one avoid frustrating someone even though they're the editor? In my experience with Chandler, he didn't do that in the if I don't get, and Chandler's saying I don't get frustrated with him that often, that's true. The reason that I don't get frustrated with Chandler is not because I don't like what he's saying, it's because he wins my trust over all the time before we hit that situation. So it's not like there's a trick to flip it in the moment, but he's doing the work all the time. Like I remember one time we were commuting to work together because it's Holland to Grand Rapids, and I was just getting, I was just down, and I'm like telling him all this stuff, and he's like, oh boy, like before we go to work, let's get this guy's head on straight. So he pulls over to a coffee shop, and he's like, all right, well, tell me about it. And he buys me a coffee and a bagel, and he sits me down. And he just lets me talk it out, and then we go to work, right? Yeah. But the amount of, like, if you just think of it like a relational bank account, that was $1,000 deposit. And then when he does an editing comment, it's $100. He's taking out $100. I mean, he wins me over all the time when we're not in the tense moments. So that when we're in the tense moments, he's got a lot of street cred with me, and I think it's partly because it's such a compatible thing that when I'm up and down, or if I have a lot of ideas or whatever, I mean, you can even hear how Chandler talks. He's so specific and concrete and helpful. He's a grounding force. So if he's going to win me over by taking me out to coffee, he certainly has the right to say, Nate, you had too many ideas there. So the distinction is he does it before the fact, not in the moment.
Yeah.
Well,
Man,
I
love that.
I think one kind of along what you were saying there, Nate, well, the reason I was thinking of Plato, the idea of holding an idea, is I think, just in general, Ryan, this comment isn't really Enneagram specific, but I'm a big proponent of trying to eliminate emotional language from a lot of discussions if you're not discussing something that needs to have emotion injected in it. And so a lot of times people get very attached to their ideas. I tried to work this out in a really bad LinkedIn article, and I was like, I'm going to write about this. And I kind of worked through some of these ideas, but I think to Nate's point about trust, if you're talking about Enneagram, great. Maybe you have some language to bring to the table that helps you separate your emotion from your ideas. That's a great starting place. If you don't have that pre-existing structure or knowledge to bring to the table, a huge benefit when you're just trying to, I think the trendy people call it ideate, but come up with a lot of different ways of thinking about something, is you do have to separate yourself emotionally from them. And so let's say it's Nate and myself, we're thinking through some ideas. We really want to help this local business owner just with some challenges that they have. You have to be willing to say, some of my ideas are going to be bad, and it's much better for both of us if one of us calls that out and we just move past it. And that's really, really hard, for example, in a marriage. But in a lot of working relationships, I think it's going to become a really valuable skill to have that detachment from your specific way of looking at something. Because people really do put a little bit of their own ego, obviously, when you're putting forward an idea. And so Nate frames that up as, having trust in each other. I think the other side of that is also just taking your own emotion out of the equation and saying, I'm just going to present what I have to offer. If it works, great. If it doesn't, then hopefully we get to the best idea. So I think that's just another side of the equation.
Well, and I think those two things that you guys just said work so well together. I completely agree with trying to, remove emotion is a weird way to say it for me, because I don't think you mean it this way, but obviously not that all emotions are bad, but they can certainly cloud things. But that in context with what Nate's talking about, which, man, is just like a breath of fresh air to me, is this idea of, ones, or whoever the editor, just to continue to use that language, doesn't have to, get it perfectly right in the moment or say this exact phrase, but it's so much more about the relationship ongoing before and after the editing process. And I think that's an amazing insight. And so I love that. That's just great for me to hear, even if nobody else even listens to this episode.
Right.
So I love that, and I appreciate those insights there. So let's kind of wrap it up here pretty soon. Anything else just from you guys, kind of last words to any leaders or team leaders of any kind out there that might be listening to this, who have been working through some Enneagram stuff?
Do you have any, Chandler?
Well, I guess all I would say, you asked a specific question, Ryan, which is how would you maybe frame it to people who are, and if I understand kind of what you do, you're teaching people and they're wanting to implement it in a way where it's helpful for their teams. Mm-hmm. So I guess my last thoughts would just be, it's incredibly helpful. Take advantage of it, because it sounds simple, but I can guarantee you it will give you a different set of terms that are actually human and usable. And I would juxtapose that against something like Myers-Briggs, which I think is helpful because it's very deep. But the language, I have not found it to be as accessible. So if I were to say this was an experiment, I would say the coworkers or different people that I have worked with, they've had the option to use the language of Myers-Briggs, they've had the option to use the language of an enneagram, and they've chosen of their own free will to use the language of the enneagram because it's more human. So I just think if you're looking for something that's a helpful, simple way to have productive emotional intelligence discussions, which, by the way, emotional intelligence is becoming a big part of talent attraction. If you want to keep people in their jobs, you need to make sure that, again, not just are they clear, but do they really feel like they're contributing to what you're doing? Right. This is a great way to do that. And I have no, I haven't gotten the check in the mail from you, Ryan. So it's like I have no incentive to say this other than that it's true, and my experience has been really positive. So my encouragement would be that it's the simplest way to kind of start that discussion around emotional intelligence.
Love that. Nate, what you think?
Well, I've had a couple times in my life where I got really down, and one of the things that I was surprised was really effective was the phrase, "so what?" So like I'd be, I'm in a pit, I'm crying, I'm calling my parents, I'm making a whole stink. And occasionally I would say to myself, like in the middle of a bad funk, I would just say, well, so what? Because the narrative you're telling yourself is like, this was back in college is when I really hit a low point, but I was like, I'm not doing well in school. I just don't want to be here. I'm tired of the relationships I'm in. I'm like, you start doing this laundry list of what you feel bad about. And then occasionally I would just go, well, so what? Yeah. So yeah, that's all true. Yeah. I'm not doing great in school. And, I don't love everyone that I know. And okay, that's fine. I'll deal with it. And so what was like an escape door for me. Like I just got completely out of the funk immediately when I'd say so what. And when you understand what someone's Enneagram number is, it's like that same escape door. Like if I didn't have the Enneagram language and I'm working with Chandler, I'm like, this guy cannot get creative. And now Chandler's actually very creative, but I'm like I want to go way down the creative path.
Oh,
and I'm like, this guy
is a big one.
Yeah, right. I'm like, he cannot get flexible. Be spontaneous right now. And I do start doing that despairing laundry list. The so what line is like, oh wait, he's a 1. Yeah, so what? That's kind of, I'm working with a different cat. Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. No problem. And so for me, being able to name what they're good at and just say, well, I don't want to do Excel spreadsheets, so I'm not going to make him be super spontaneous. And so what? It like snapped me out of it. So I think just using that as a little mantra to yourself, yeah, this guy's a 1. So what? That helps me get out of a tense work moment.
Yeah. Man, this has been great, guys. There's been so many little like nuggets of things that have just been really, really insightful. And I've enjoyed it, and I think listeners are going to enjoy it. I feel like I could just continue to ask a question every few minutes with you guys for quite a while and then just listen to your thoughts on it, because it's been good stuff, and it's cool to have two guys that have worked together that can have that that shared experience, that can talk about it in this kind of a format. And so I have appreciated that, and who knows, maybe we'll have you guys back on at some point in the future, and we can hear more of this good stuff.
Cool.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Ryan. Let us know how we can help, or kind of promote what you have going on and help spread the word.
Absolutely. And, I connected with both of these guys over LinkedIn. So assuming it's okay with them, I'll put their LinkedIn stuff in the description for this podcast. So if you want to connect with them, you can do that there. And not sure who we'll have next on here, but we will catch you on the next episode of another Enneagram podcast. Hey, thanks for joining us today on another Enneagram podcast.
As fellow leaders, we know it can be frustrating when it seems like you always run into the same problems on your team with the same people. But leaders just like you are learning how to lead their teams better using the Enneagram, and you can too.
So if you like what you heard today, we would love it if you would share this podcast on social media and leave a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts, preferably only good, reviews and ratings. That would be great.
If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on Instagram. We're at Another Enneagram, or head over to our website, anotherenneagram.com.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Another Enneagram podcast.